2019 is really starting to shape up to be the year of the compact car, which is great because we personally like cars over SUVs here on Test Drive, but it's also a great way for people to get a new car at an affordable price with a lot of the bells and whistles that a lot of people are expecting. Our spotlight is on this 2019 Kia Forte EX. It's new for 2019, and it gets a little bit bigger in some ways and smaller in others. It's gained 8 centimeters on the overall length, 2 centimeters on the overall width, but it's shaved off a centimeter on the overall height. Now, a lot of people have said that this looks a lot like the Kia Stinger, or at least it's inspired by it. But I really think, especially when you look around the back, that it's got more of a Kia Cadenza look. But then again, all of the new models from Kia have been designed by Peter Schreier, including the Kia Stinger and this. So of course, there's going to be some inspiration between it. But I don't think this is really a baby Kia Stinger, and even not really a baby Cadenza either. It's not very luxurious, but the styling is more in line with some of the other cars in Kia's lineup. So we're going to be showing you everything about this compact car, taking it on a drive in the snow, and going over everything you need to know if you're in the market for a new compact car. So yeah, I mentioned that there's a lot going on for the compact segment this year in 2019. We've already featured the 2019 Volkswagen Jetta. You can take a look at the video at the end. We'll have a link there. But it's very important, if you actually are in the market for this segment, you'll want to watch that video because we're going to be talking about some of the things about this car that are somewhat related to the 2019 Jetta that we did earlier on. But also the Mazda 3 is coming out this year. The Hyundai Elantra has been updated for 2019. Honda Civic also received a small facelift for 2019. And then the Chevy Cruze is being killed off. So there's a lot of change going on in this segment this year. So I think it's really exciting. But anyway, let's get into the nitty-gritty, the details, everything you want to know if you're in the market for this new car. Now, all the trims get some basic safety features here in Canada. 6 airbags are standard. You also get stability control, ABS, hill assist, and the rear view camera system. No matter which trim you get, you're going to get all that. The EX trim gets a couple extra features on top of that, including tire pressure monitoring, blind spot detection, lane keep assist, driver attention, forward collision warning, and a rear cross traffic alert. Now I want to give Kia some bonus points for putting LED headlights on all but the absolute base model trim here in Canada. So this EX has LED headlights, and pretty much everything but the LX base model, they all come with LED. Now, as I mentioned, the front end, I don't see any real Kia Stinger resemblance with it. It does look a little bit more actually like the Kia Niro or even the Sportage. It wears the corporate face and it does a good job doing it with the Tiger Shark nose. I like it. It's right in the middle, right? It's not an overly aggressive looking car like the Honda Civic. I think that car has turned a lot of people off who were more traditional. It's not a super boring car either, right? It's not overly conservative that people are going to fall asleep. It's right in the middle. It's a really good sweet spot of being just a little sporty to get enthusiasts excited and not too sporty to get the mainstream buyer still interested in a car like this. Now with the EX, you also get 16-inch alloy rims on the side. You can get up to 17 inches if you go up to the other 50 million trims that they have for the Kia Forte. Now there is no keyless entry into this car, which is kind of what we find on the lower end trims for the compact segment. So you still have a key fob that allows you to unlock and lock the doors and pop open the trunk. But when you get in the car, you have to put the key in and start it up. So we're going to jump around back now and talk about the features there, and then we'll jump inside. Now, if you pay attention here, the headlights and taillights are actually on. I have the key in the ignition just to keep the lights on so you can see them as we film this A-roll. That's going to be important in a second as I talk about the trunk. Now, again, the rear end has somewhat similar look to the Cadenza, similar kind of taillights. You do have this bar that runs along the center. Now, let's talk about the trunk, okay? How do I get into it? I don't have a key. There's no smart key, right? So you'd think there's still a button or some sort of release for it. But no, it reminds me of my 1990 Honda Accord where you kind of need to do it manually, but there's not even a keyhole. So you have to do it from either the fob, you hold down the button and you can pop it open, or you do it from the floorboard in the car. I have to go inside now, pop it open because the key is in the ignition. It's a little bit of a pain in the butt. But you can see here, it opens up pretty well. If you're on a good incline, it might open up fully. But I want to talk about the trunk because if you watched our episode on the 2019 Volkswagen Jetta, you'll know that I found that the trunk interior was really cheaply done. They put really cheap welds on it. They didn't cover anything up. They used huge springs to be able to lift the trunk up. Take a look at the trunk here. it's really well put together. You do have some padding on the top to cover up what would be where the welds are to be able to put the hinges on the trunk part. I like it. It looks good. Trunk space is good as well. And then the way that the actual trunk opens up just feels way better engineered than it is on the Volkswagen. There are no springs. It uses a twist system on the back to be able to pull the trunk up and to be able to close it down. And I find that it's not overly heavy. That was one problem with the Jetta, is you'd have like a notch, so as you're pulling it down, you got to pull it down. With this one, it's perfect. And I know it doesn't sound like an overly important thing to go over, but because we talked about it at length on the Jetta, I want to make sure that we're showing the differences if you watch other vehicles in our segments here. So you can see, I think it's really well put together. Looks a lot more, not premium, but it looks like less cost-cutting. So I like it. Before we jump on the inside, I want to talk about a couple of the mechanical elements of this car. Up front, it's using a new 2-liter inline 4 engine. It's on the Atkinson Cycle instead of using an Auto Cycle, even though the Atkinson Cycle in today's terms really is just a derivative of it. But it is used more on hybrid cars or PHEVs. So this is a different tech used on a regular fuel-burning car rather than having a hybrid setup. Kia says that this will improve fuel economy, but when it comes to Atkinson Cycle technology, you usually end up losing power. It's why a lot of the engines are turbocharged. This one, though, is naturally aspirated. So even though it has the same horsepower and torque from the previous generation, it might not be as powerful as it could be if it was running on a regular Auto Cycle. And another change with the engine setup here is it switched from a gasoline direct injection to a multi-port injection system. For the average consumer, for most people, it's not going to make a difference. You won't notice it. But for the enthusiasts out there or die-hard gearheads, you might notice it or you might be aware of it and care, but at the end of the day, for most people, it isn't going to make a difference. Aside from that, though, the biggest change that most people probably won't notice, but it is an important thing to say, is this uses a CVT. Kia calls it their intelligent variable transmission. Now, they said that they sent their engineers off to research what the common issues and problems people had when it came to CVTs. Kia says they've come up with an adaptive style shift logic as well as a chain type belt instead of a push belt. Kia claims that this will give you a smooth linear acceleration and better performance if you're doing something like wide open throttle. I have driven it for the last couple weeks and I have to say that it really does feel like a more traditional automatic, especially when you put it into sport mode. So we'll talk about that a little bit more on the road test, but they really do claim that this is a much more intelligent system than the other competition is using. They've also wrapped the entire CVT in a sound insulating case. They say that it reduces about 5 decibels worth of noise from the interior cabin. So they've reduced noise, they've improved the way that it feels, and I gotta say it's working so far. And this is gonna be the blueprint moving forward for future transmissions on Kia vehicles. So anyway, let's jump in now and talk about the inside of the 2019 Kia Forte. Alright, so let's talk about the interior of the 2019 Kia Forte EX. You can get features like dual zone climate control, ventilated front seats, even active cruise control and navigation. We don't have that on this car, so we're not going to really talk about it. I just want to go over the things on this specific trim. You have cloth seats all around. They're pretty supportive, nothing special. They do a good job. Benefit for us here in Canada is heated seats and heated steering wheel, plus air conditioning actually are standard throughout the entire Kia Forte lineup. So even on the base model, you're going to get things like heated steering wheel and heated seats, and that steering wheel definitely comes in handy. They warm up pretty quickly, heated steering wheel within a couple minutes to the point where I need to turn it off. Same thing with the front seats. Overall space is good here. I'm 6 foot tall. I've got roughly about half an inch of headroom where I'm seated in this position. Rear seat space is good as well. They've added a bit of extra leg room. My daughter's happy back there. And on the EX trim that we have here, you get an armrest with cup holder. On the LX and LX Plus trims, there is no armrest on the back. The 8-inch infotainment screen is pretty similar. In fact, everything that we've seen from Kia and Hyundai over the last little while has used this infotainment software. We really like it. Android Auto and Apple CarPlay work very well. Again, you can upgrade to Harman Kardon with navigation at the top end trim. No dual zone climate control, just regular rotary knobs here for basically heat or air conditioning. And then you have your vent speed and direction below it. Qi wireless charging, and there's also USB ports and an auxiliary port underneath there. Aside from that, everything works well. Cup holders are actually good size. I've had a couple of people comment. I usually drink an extra large coffee from McDonald's. It fits without me having to hold on to it. It's nice and snug there. We'll try to include that information on future test drive episodes. In terms of the actual layout and design, it is very functional. There's no drama. Everything's exactly where you expect it to be. You do have some Stinger-esque style vents on the sides, but aside from that, everything makes sense. The car makes sense to me. I think if you're coming in and looking at this car based on the price point, you're going to be pretty content with it. There's nothing that's overly luxurious or premium about it, but it does get the job done. And again, we've been driving it for about 2.5, 3 weeks now, and I have no major complaints when it comes to the inside space of this car. Let's take it on a road test now and talk about how this car performs on the road, including that new engine, the CVT, and everything else you need to know if you're in the market for buying a new compact car. I've had this Kia Forte EX for almost 3 weeks as the time we're filming this. And one of the reasons why I've waited so last minute is because, believe it or not, here in Quebec, we haven't had any snow over this period. Today is really the only day that we've had a little bit of accumulation. There's a little bit of snow on the road, and the very lack of road maintenance that the province here does is a good example of what we would be experiencing if there was probably a little bit more snow, because they really just don't plow. They don't really do any proper de-icing. So I've waited because I do want to do more winter testing stuff. It's one thing for us to be able to show you all the features and everything, but we really do have the unique ability to be able to show these cars off in sort of worse climates than other journalists might be able to. So it's why I take that advantage. Now, this isn't going to be the end-all be-all winter test. As you can see from the front camera, it's not really that much accumulation, but it's a good idea of what this car can do, because I have been driving it in conditions sort of similar to this. And I do have a little bit of wheel spin, a little bit of tire spin. It's pretty normal for a front-wheel drive car, so I'm not overly concerned about it. But you know, we pull off here, a little bit of snow. Yeah, you give a good amount of power, not mashing the accelerator, and you'll go. But I do find that in very rare cases, I'll come to a stop and then the car will lose traction, even though there's not a whole lot of snow. And there's one area, it's happened several times, so I'm just thinking that it could be the specific area. But when I start to go, the car really just shuts down. I guess the traction control kicks on too much, and like there's no power. And then I have to mash the accelerator for it to go. So just something to note. But again, since we're doing a winter test, I might not be able to talk about all the technical things that I was hoping to on this road test, but I do want to make sure I try to cover the important things. And that's really the engine and the transmission, because those are two things that are kind of important for this car, especially if you're coming from an older Forte. If you have the previous generation, you might be aware that they have had some engine issues with it. Also, the transmission is quite different from anything that we've seen from Kia before. They're using a CVT. Now, before you start commenting and saying how much you hate it, this might be one of the best CVTs that we've driven. Not only because it just doesn't feel like one at all, but it actually performs a lot better than you might expect, especially if you put it into sport mode. And it's one of the things I like. You have a drive mode selector just beside the gear lever here. You can put it into smart mode or sport mode or normal mode. I've had it in smart mode pretty much the entire time that I've had the car. But unlike a lot of cars where when you put the transmission into sport mode, you also have to change the driving profile elsewhere, this one does it all together. So if you put the shift lever into sport mode, it switches the drive mode automatically for you. Everything changes over. And again, it feels like you're driving an automatic with a sport mode. So we're in sport mode right now. Not necessarily the smartest thing to be doing when it's snowing and the roads are not plowed. Now you can see we're slipping a little bit. You might not be able to see it too much. I could feel it. You might be able to see it a little bit on the video, but it's one of the reasons why we're not going to keep it in sport mode. If I put it back into smart, I see still a little bit. Like it's not coming up on the computer telling me that I'm having traction control issues, but you can feel it, right? So you have to be careful. But it's pretty typical with pretty much any front-wheel drive car, especially in this segment. I haven't really driven a front-wheel drive car that I like in the winter, especially since moving here to Quebec. I really do prefer all-wheel drive. Now, another thing that I've noticed with the engine here, when you get to 4,000 RPM, 4,500 RPM, you do get a little bit of extra power. You can feel it sort of boost up a little bit, as it would if you were driving something like a Honda with VTEC or even a BMW with Vanos. It kind of kicks up a little bit more in that higher rev count. You might be using it, I mean, getting onto the highway, even with 3 people in the car has not been a problem. I've been pretty happy with it. Again, very similar to pretty much all the other compacts we've driven this year, including the Chevy Cruze, the Hyundai Elantra, and the 2019 Volkswagen Jetta, which is the most comparable, just in the sense that it's a new 2019 model, just like this. And the last thing I want to talk about just before we wrap up and go into our likes and dislikes and talk about the fuel economy is that rear torsion beam suspension. Just like the Jetta, and just like about half of the vehicles in this segment, it uses that torsion beam instead of a multi-link rear independent suspension. And I mentioned it with the Jetta video that you will probably notice it if you're more of an enthusiast or if you're coming from a previous generation. And same with this, you probably will notice it if it's something that you're looking for. If you don't really care that it has a torsion beam in the back, then you might not notice. But if you're going over some areas here in Quebec, especially potholy areas with a lot of bumps, you'll feel it a little bit more, just because that is distributed between the entire rear end instead of localized to whatever side is hitting the bump. So you do feel it a little bit more. That's the way that things are going, though. I mean, people want more features. They want Android Auto, they want Apple CarPlay, they want ventilated seats on the top end trim, right? They want these things, and the only way for manufacturers to get that is by going up and getting rid of some of the small little tiny features that end up saving them the money to be able to put those features in. And to be honest, that's what consumers want, especially at this price point in this segment. People don't care. I think it's going to be a trend that's going to continue. Unless the consumers demand that these features remain in, they're going to be removed. They're going to be replaced with things that are more cost efficient so that the manufacturers can put those added goodies, bells and whistles that people ultimately want out of their cars today.
3 weeks is a long time to get to know a new car, and it's given us the chance to thoroughly investigate the 2019 Forte EX. Now, there's a lot to like about this new compact sedan, and we'll start off with the fuel economy. The Forte did 5.9 liters per 100 kilometers or 40 US miles per gallon on our 100 kilometer test loop, and 7.2 liters per 100 kilometers or 32 US mpg during our 1400 kilometer 3-week trip with this car, though we did use the Forte a lot in town and for short distance driving during the holidays. The exterior design is also a hit for us, having the perfect blend of sport and style to get the job done for most buyers. Kia's intelligent continuous variable transmission is something the engineers behind this project should be proud of, giving us a smooth acceleration experience without any adverse reaction from it. We know CVTs are a dirty word in enthusiast circles, but this one seriously impressed us. Interior space was also a plus for us. With the added legroom over the previous generation, you end up with 107.1 centimeters for front legroom and 90.6 centimeters in the rear, plus 433 liters of storage capacity in the trunk. Finally, Kia is raising the bar in the segment by offering features like heated seats, a heated steering wheel, and air conditioning on all models for this car, and having LED headlights on the EX and higher trim. These are features you definitely need living here in Canada, and gives us something a little extra over the US spec models that you'd have to pay a little bit more for. Now, 3 weeks has certainly given me a lot of time to go over this car, and despite it not being the top-end EX Limited trim, we really didn't find much to dislike about it. I think the number one problem for Kia Canada will be the number of trims they have. With 6 to choose from without a huge difference between any of them, dealerships end up having to order more selection than they require, which ends up causing problems when a buyer wants a specific trim in a particular color. The outgoing Mazda 3 has 4 trims in Canada, with 2 special editions for the 50th anniversary of the brand, and the 2019 Volkswagen Jetta we featured only had 3 trims. Simplicity in this segment is what will help sell more cars. We also hate the lack of fog lights on Canadian spec cars, outside of the roughly 150 launch edition vehicles sold here. Sure, the fog lights would be halogen, but the cutouts on the front bumper will always remind me of an option that wasn't selected. And finally, the trunk access was a bit of a pain. Having a button to open the trunk would be handy, considering there's no way to do it unless you have the fob or you do it from inside the car. Now, you might think it's silly, but when you want to load things up and have to find the fob each time just to pop the trunk, you'll understand why I found it annoying. Going up to the EX Premium or EX Limited will get you the keyless entry, which will have a button for it, but not on this model. But overall, the 2019 Kia Forte is a seriously good car in this segment, and we're really excited to see how the rest of the competition fares this year with their own updates and refreshes for 2019. It's great that so much activity is happening in the small car segment. The crossovers haven't won yet.